Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. We are super thrilled to have our alumni panel. This is Identities in the Workplace, sponsored by Outlet, our LGBTQ plus student organization on our campus. The purpose of this panel is for our students to ask real, honest questions and get real, honest answers back. And so whatever questions that you may have about career or identity, I mean, this is your time and place to submit them. We're very excited to have 3 alumni join us today. If we'll just go in order of graduation date. Jerry, would you like to go first? Introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Jerry Portwood. I graduated in '99 from Oglethorpe with a degree in English and lots of minors, including writing, theater, and some others, French. And I have worked as a journalist and editor and writer for over 20 years since graduating. And until very recently, very recently, I was the digital editorial director of Rolling Stone, which, if you're not familiar, is a publication that's been around for over 50 years and is a music publication as well as politics and culture. I previously was the executive editor at Out magazine, which I would also say used to be one of the premier LGBTQ publications in the world and is kind of not as great as it used to be. And then I also have worked at other various publications and written for other places. And I'm currently going to be refocusing my life to work on some of my own creative projects because I was recently laid off from my job, which was a surprise. So surprise. And I was the most senior gay and queer person at the company, so it was a bit of a shock to many people. And I did mentor a lot of our queer identified, gender non-binary, and also people of color at the company. So that's been a big blow to them. So I'm happy to answer questions about all of that as well. I have no shame and no hesitation to tell you truths. So go for it.
Thank you, Jerry. And he is tuning in from New York City.
Oh yeah, I'm in my apartment in West Harlem right now, right across the street from City College, 20 blocks north of Columbia University.
Very fancy. All right, and then next we have Mark.
Hello, everyone. I'm here in Washington, D.C., moving south, going toward the Atlanta campus, also moving a little less exciting from Jerry. I will say it's going to be hard to have, I know there have been a lot of changes at Out Magazine, but it's hard to be better than when you were there, Jerry. I've been working in higher ed, especially the communications and marketing area for about 20 years. I graduated in 2003 from Oglethorpe with a degree in communications before they had the rhetoric studies part of it. Also had a number of minors in Spanish and psychology and urban leadership. Yeah, I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you, Mark. And then next we have Carly.
I am going to be the least decorated member of this panel. I'm coming to you guys from Nashville. I graduated from Oglethorpe in 2010. I worked for Atlanta and Veranda magazines when I lived in Atlanta. And then I decided to come back home. My family lives in Nashville. I did jobs in healthcare. I did jobs in sports design, even though I don't like sports. I came to Oglethorpe partially because I read an article where their mascot I thought was a couch, but that was just a misreading on my part. It was just a special couch. I was sad about that. And then I worked as a developer. And around that time, I realized I had ADHD. So I got medicated and now I work in insurance and I don't job hop anymore. But very excited to be here. I've had a lot of different jobs and therefore a lot of different experiences being queer in all of those jobs.
Thank you so much, Carly. She also happens to be a mom to a beautiful, beautiful son. And then we have Jamie joining us from Outlet. Jamie, will you introduce yourself? Tell us your major and your graduation date and whatever else you'd like to say.
Hello, I'm Jamie Lester. I'm from the class of 2024, so a sophomore. I'm a physics major with the astrophysics track at Oglethorpe, and I'm the secretary for Outlet.
All right, thank you. And just to be clear, my name is not career development. My name is Nicole Kang. I am the employer relations manager here. And I'm just really excited about this discussion that we'll have. So Jamie, do you want to go ahead and start off with some of the questions that you may have?
Sure. So to start out, sort of like as a broad question, how has being a part of the LGBTQ community in a broad sense affected your experience in the workplace for your current job or previous jobs in general?
Harley, go first.
Oh man. Currently, I am with the most affirming employer I've ever had. They fly a pride flag every year, and I'm marching in the pride parade this weekend. It has not often been that easy though. So I've run that spectrum to when I was looking to be hired in 2018, I was told not to be open about my family. And I was 6 months pregnant with my wife's baby at the time. So that was like not really an option for me. So I've had a lot of different experiences there.
And then I'll jump in. I think for me, working in the higher ed sphere has been generally an open, welcoming environment. I've also been out for the majority of my career, not the early career. I came out after college. We'll probably talk about that later. And I was talking to Carly earlier, and like being out, being visible is important, right? And so I know that I'm not gonna even try to work at a place that's not open or accepting and affirming, right? And generally my resume has something on it that's LGBTQ related, right? Whether it's community service or activism, board member stuff. So I feel like, that's me putting myself out there at first. And if an organization is not going to be comfortable with that, they're going to, just not invite me in. So that's okay.
I'll go back to the origin. So I actually came out when I was 15 in 1992, living on a military base in Okinawa, Japan, which I would not recommend living on an isolated place like that when you don't have the internet, you didn't have resources. I definitely felt like a freak and that I was alone, and luckily it went well. But it was also when President Bill Clinton had signed Don't Ask, Don't Tell into place. And so I was a very activist-oriented young person, let's say. We didn't have a lot of the language and things that we talk about now. At the time, I remember people saying, like, are you bisexual? That's cool, because Kurt Cobain said he was bisexual. And I was like, nope, I'm gay, because that was the word we used. And people being like, oh, that's not good. And I basically came out to my entire high school by doing a monologue from Larry Kramer's The Normal Heart. And yeah, that was intense. Anyway, so when I went to the South and moved to Georgia to finish out high school, I knew I was still going to be out. And then when I went to Oglethorpe, I was out, and I was one of the few openly gay people on the campus at the time. There wasn't a lot of, and Outlet was actually pretty new at the time. That was in 1995. And so I don't know, I've always just kind of lived my truth. And but there's been times when I've been working that I always wondered, is it going to keep me from getting a promotion or getting hired? But I just didn't feel like, even though as a white cis man, I can pass pretty well, I think, I definitely felt like at some points I was putting myself into a very, I wear what I call my preppy drag because I feel like I can get through. And but over the course of my career, I've obviously embraced it more because I mean, I worked it out, and then it was kind of like, well, you're going to be a professional gay now. And but over the last few years, I've really embraced the term queer, and I do say I'm a queer gay man. I say gay is my like sexual orientation or sexual activity, and queer is more of my identity and the way I feel in the world as a other. And that's been new. And I actually did that. I came out, I was interviewing the cast of Jagged Little Pill in front of Broadway Con audience, and I said it for the first time. And I was like, and that's something I guess I always think I like to remind people is that, I came out officially to my parents when I was 15, but you come out all the time your entire life in different ways, to your doctor, to your boss, to people on the subway, to people on the street, all the time. And I had a a politician I was interviewing once who said that to me, and I had never thought about like, oh yeah, you don't just come out once, you come out all the time, and you do make those decisions in lots of micro ways and big ways. So there's my long-winded answer.
My husband would talk about disclosure, right?
Yeah.
We choose who we disclose to after we've come out.
Yeah.
Definitely, you can't just do it once and be done.
Yeah. Or deciding if I'm going to kiss my husband when I say goodbye or if I'm not. You know, like PDA has been a big deal for me. But even just saying husband in the office, you know, we've been together for 20 years, but we were domestic partnered after 5, but then got legally married 6 years ago. And I used to really be allergic to the term husband. I really like the word partner, especially because he speaks Spanish and I like pareja in Spanish. And so I got really comfortable using those terms. But every time I say husband, I feel like I'm coming out. You know, it's like a thing.
And sometimes you have to argue with people about it because, especially Jerry, as you're talking about when you're passing, people, which is not a problem, people just put you in like the straight category. And so I'll have like what I call the pause, and I'll be like, oh yeah, my ex-wife, da da da. And then you can see someone like trying to put, especially when I had like longer hair and I wore more dresses, like trying to put me together with what I just said. And sometimes you have to argue with like people on the phone. You're like, blah, 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 and my wife, and they're like, okay, well, what's his name? And you're like, Jacqueline, you know, so it's a fun part.
That actually transitions very well into our next question, which is, have you ever felt the pressure to come out, and how do you balance privacy with authenticity and feeling like you are or aren't ready for taking that step in different stages of your life with different people?
I can go first on this one, actually. I came out when I was 13, and it was the early aughts in Nashville, which is like big Baptist country. And I was just pissed. I think I've been pissed since I was about 13 years old that people spoke poorly of being queer or gay and that I had to come out. So I was more aggressive when I was younger. And now I'm very matter of fact about it. You can't hurt my feelings about it. You can't make me feel bad about it. I like who I am. And now as a parent, it's different because it's not just me. So I find myself for the first time in my life thinking about how I'm going to come out and how I'm going to disclose that, because it affects a 3-year-old and not me.
Yeah, I think, you know, again, I came out after college and was obviously aware that I was attracted to men from an early age, and was teased by a couple kids in school, or, you know, just called the F word or something. And I was just like, you know, no, I'm not, because they meant it as a bad term, right? And being gay wasn't as much a thing, right? It wasn't in my world. We didn't have the visibility for the community that we do now. So that's come a long way. I think when I did come out, I did use the word queer. I knew I was gay. A lot of people would, you know, use the term bisexual. I don't know if they still do this, but like that's your bridge, right? That's your dipping your toe in the water to see if it's safe. And then you're like, no, I actually just like guys, or, you know, I just like girls. But I came out to my parents as queer, and my uncle, who is a straight white man, but he's been in the LGBT community and been an ally and an advocate for 70 years now, basically, not quite that long. He was shocked. He was like, did you say the Q word? Because, you know, when he was growing up, queer was a bad word, and that's what people were calling us, and we rejected that term. So like, he saw this as like this powerful reclamation for me, right? And I think, to Jerry's point earlier, that was me saying, I'm not like everyone else, right? This is my difference. I'm an outsider in that way. And I think, so like in the coming out process, whenever it happens, right, you first got to reconcile it with yourself. And you come out to yourself and get comfortable enough with it, then you can then share it with loved ones, right? And I think you absolutely have to do that in your own time and space, right? And whether you first share it with family members or friends, whoever you're closest with. And then in my head, in my view, you just kind of are. And as we said, you're going to have to keep coming out or disclosing over and over again, probably for the rest of your life, and listening to that pause when you say, oh, my husband and I, are looking to rent a car or whatever. My husband needs this. And that's just something, that we put up with for now, I think. But again, it's that confidence in yourself that you have to realize and then build and develop over time.
I am curious about this idea, this notion of coming out over and over again. This must be so exhausting, having to explain yourself to others. I'm just curious, how do you cope with that? Like, I know there is that internal sense of like, I know who I am, but like, how does that manifest in your behavior? Like this is a separate discussion, but like I have to always talk about my ethnic background to people. Like people want to know that. And from my perspective, that's not their business to know, but I'm having to always repeatedly say, yes, I'm Korean, I'm Korean, I'm Korean. And I struggle with that, honestly. I struggle with having to talk about it over and over. So I'm just curious from your point of view, how is that, especially because it's connected to your family?
I think for me, well, first I was going to flip the question and talk about the opposite, which is I've actually lived a very unsecretive life. I believe in being very transparent and open, but I've dated men, especially in Georgia, who were closeted, and that was actually harder, is to be forced to not be authentic and to hide things. Especially one of my boyfriends worked at a big accounting firm, and he told me, oh, I'm going to go to the Christmas party, I'm going to bring one of my female friends because I need to kind of like show that I'm not gay. And I was like, what? Like, you can't bring me? I mean, this was in the late 90s, but still, I was like, you're a bad person for this. And anyway, that relationship doesn't exist. But that was actually harder, it was the opposite. But then I think the harder part is, I mean, again, I'm pretty open and willing to talk about anything, but people, when it's about your sexuality, especially who you enjoy to have pleasure with, they want to know details of your sex life. That's actually the harder part. If you want, and you're like, is this appropriate? And why do you want to know this? And why is this a question that has to come up? And what does it matter if I'm a top or a bottom or how I express my sexuality? That I think is, especially when you're in an HR situation and like, that these are inappropriate questions for a workplace, but yet that's what people want to start talking about.
I have been asked how lesbians have sex more times than I can count. And it's not usually your close friends. It's usually like kind of acquaintances. And it's like you're the gay that they want to ask. And that tokenism, I think, Nicole, is kind of what you were talking about. I think I don't care if I come out. I actually don't even care if any question is asked to me, even if it's an offensive question, if it's asked in an open or an innocent or a curious way. What I don't like is when I come out and then someone immediately starts talking about their gay friend, because it's like in their head, like, I don't have any relation to your cousin, Bob. Like, I just don't. And I was thinking about that one day, and I had an Iranian coworker, and I was like, oh, I knew an Iranian girl in 3rd grade. And I was like, holy shit, I just did that thing I hate when people do it to me. And so I had that conversation with myself because I was just like, that is tokenism, and I don't ever want to make anyone feel that way. So that was eye-opening for me. So it's always good to make sure you don't feel. I always thought that it was like, if I was different, I was queer, so I understood everybody's experiences, but I do not. I only understand my experience, and so I try to be really open-minded and humble and not assume. I try.
So that not assuming is hard, but I also try that with a lot of things, right? And Nicole, to your question about, how do you just keep coming out? It's different when you choose, to say it, like dropping my husband and I are doing, we're going on a trip in office, and that's one way to signal to other people and, come out on the sly in a way, or just drop it in. And again, increase visibility. It's another if you're just asked directly, which I think happens a lot less in the adult world, but then as we've discussed, you get those other questions about how does it work? Who does what? And you're just like, no, right? Like, it's not your business. I'm going to dodge and tell you that question is inappropriate.
And there's other ancillary parts of that, at least in my career, because if we're covering HIV and things like that, then people want to know about your status. And I think even like we're dealing with COVID and like disclosing if you've had any kind of disease, like it becomes part of it, that becomes part of your identity. There's like so many other parts of the identity that you don't always think about, and that people think that they can intuit or try to pry out of you. And then you have to decide what is personal and what is important to share or not share, why. But in my career, I mean, because you're dealing with bias, people are like, oh well, we need to know all these things about you because maybe you're assigning these stories or publishing these stories because you have some sort of bias against something or for something. So it gets complicated in lots of ways, and you have to modulate it.
Okay, so how have you all dealt with discriminations and microaggressions, particularly in the workplace with coworkers or management, perhaps?
I first want to say that I love that we have the term microaggression now, because it didn't exist when I was a younger person. But then everything can be a microaggression, so I hate it at the same time. I will say that since it's a safe space, that when I was laid off, I did make it very clear that I was disappointed that they were targeting a queer person who had been such an advocate for queer people in the company. So I also turned it on them and wanted to make sure that was noted. But I'll let Carly talk about microaggressions.
I have to say, so I've been stealth at one company, and I know things are different now, and I'm maybe a little old school, but it was a Church of Christ company, and to me, that's a very like conservative Christian sect. So I'm sure not all people would have a problem, but I was concerned that they might. And so I actually had not been in a place for a long time where people didn't know I was queer. And I was kind of heartened to discover that like what I was hearing was not so terrible. Like there were a few gay jokes that just weren't as, I don't know. I sussed out the situation for a long time. I actually think the worst microaggression I had was because I was a woman, and I was a programmer for Android phones for a little while. And a guy, it wasn't even a microaggression, it was just an aggression. The guy came right up to me and he said, "Women can't program." And I was just like, and from my experience, like my mom is a programmer, my aunt is so to me, I had grown up with mostly women that I knew who were programmers. And how I dealt with it was before I left the company, I went to my boss and I said, "Hey, I would like you guys to know that you should never put a young woman in that office with that man." And my boss was like, "Oh my God, what happened?" And I told him, and then that man did not work there very long after that. But for me and where I've gotten to in my life in my 30s, that didn't bother me, but I wanted to make sure that I tried to protect any young women who came after me, because I thought that I would have taken it differently in my 20s when I was less self-assured.
And I guess I'll say one of the surprising things that happened, I've mainly worked at progressive places, but even at Out Magazine, some of the things that were said would be surprising. And the one that always still stands out to me, and I feel like I handled well, was I always recruited and mentored interns, and I had a young trans woman apply, and I was really excited. It was going to be the first time I'd been able to hire a trans person. She was really talented, and my boss said, "I don't know if we should have her work here, because what if we say something and she gets offended and maybe she shouldn't work here?" And I was like, that's not a reason not to hire somebody. And so I'm going to do this, and I will just educate everyone and make sure that if people do make mistakes, we have discussions. But the fact that our mission is what it is, I don't think I'm going to let you take away an opportunity for someone based off of that. And then the same at Rolling Stone, I hired my first gender non-binary employee, and they were very open that they wanted to make sure people understood the pronouns, and there are some older people that I felt like that was going to be an issue. And to get ahead of that, I invited GLAD to give us a training so that they could explain gender identity and expression versus sexuality, and also pronouns and all this stuff. And so we did a company-wide training that everyone was invited to. And I hoped that also didn't feel like I was creating a microaggression against the employee because of doing this, because it was for everyone to learn, not just, hey, you guys are going to make a mistake or we have this new employee. It was for the whole company. And then later for our LGBTQ affinity group for PMC, which is Penske Media that owns Rolling Stone now, I also organized another one for the entire 1,000 employees there, just because I felt like it was important for people to be educated. But so I also have been trying to be proactive against those moments, because I think that's a part of it as well, not just to hope and pray.
I was going to, just jump in and say I love that opportunity to turn it into an educational moment, right? And call people in and help kind of elevate, and whether you're preventing or just educating, I guess proactively preventing, right? It's tough. And again, you like coming out, you have to choose how you're going to respond to each situation, right? And whether you realize it's microaggression in the moment, right? Like best way to do it is just to try to stay calm and respond and educate, right? And let that person know, because they might not realize what they said was offensive.
Okay, so to sort of go in the other direction, so this isn't all sort of negative, what's been a highlight, if there is one, of being LGBTQ in your workplace? What's been something that like you can look back on and feel like good about afterwards that's related to your identity?
I think for me is kind of being that early adopter on the they them pronoun as singular, right? And that's something that I'm a grammar person, right? So at first I was like, no, you can't do that. That's not right. Because it wasn't a thing when we were growing up, right? But now I'm like, I totally understand why this makes sense, right? And we should be doing that. And we shouldn't just say he/she when we're talking, if we put both of them in there. Why should we always say he or always say she, right? Let's just say they. So the students are coming, they will all have a great experience, right? And just trying to be proactive, and again, thinking about the other and any other marginalized communities as well, and trying to increase their visibility.
Jerry's going to blow this one out of the water. Go for it, Jerry.
No, I just was going to say my biggest thing has just been being able to queer the coverage that everywhere I've worked. And when I got to Rolling Stone in 2016, even though the founder is now openly gay man, he's very old fashioned, John Winter. And I was the only really gay man working there. And I felt very isolated. And I just made sure that we were going to push what we were doing. It wasn't just going to be about, white male rockers. It was going to be about queer women. It was going to be about people of color. It was going to, and we've done that a lot over the years, and really over the last 5 years, especially it's changed. Yeah, I mean, one of the things I just had the privilege always of, when I needed to learn something, I could talk to really smart people about it. So like last year during the pandemic, when I was freaking out about COVID, I interviewed Peter Staley, who is a ACT UP pioneer, and asked him about viral loads and harm reduction and all this stuff, and it really gave me confidence. And then earlier this year, I got to interview Tori Peters, who's a trans writer, and she was one of the best interviews I've ever had in my life. But those things wouldn't have happened if I didn't do it, and that always also is frustrating, because you're like, well, I wish this stuff would happen even if I weren't there. Does it really take one person to be able to change things? And the sad answer sometimes is yes, that you hope that you change the culture enough that it will exist without your presence, but then you never are sure how that will go. But things have just changed so rapidly. It's funny you mentioned the their thing, because I had issues with it, especially once when I was editing a piece with a very famous poet, and they had changed their pronouns but hadn't told their publicist until after we published the piece. And then I had to go re-edit the whole piece, and I was really not happy about that, because, and then it just got complicated because I was like, well, you didn't use those pronouns back in the 80s when you got famous, so we're going to have to use she, because we're not going to, I don't believe in changing and redacting history. Anyway, it's very complicated, but I have come a long way with the grammar as well, because it frustrated me at first.
I will just say I am comically bad at they, them. I am all for it. I like totally am for, I sound like I'm just stuttering all over myself, but I figure, you know, we all try our best. I think mine is a lot more personal. I have not met many pregnant queer people or, you know, queer people having families. That's still pretty new. And the environment in which you do that now is different than you used to do it. So by and large, not true for everybody, but often you would have children from a straight marriage. And then you would have those children, you know, in your new career relationship. And I'm divorced now, but my wife and I had a baby. It was IVF baby. So I felt like I was kind of on the precipice of this thing where a lot of people, just a lot of people our age don't have children, even in your 30s and 40s. That's pretty much a new thing. And I think it's wonderful, but it also creates a divide in your friends normally, but it's just a really different experience to be a queer parent, because being a parent changes you and what you can do so fundamentally. So, and what I didn't realize before becoming a parent that I've alluded to as well is now your decision to live openly now affects someone else. So it's things like I literally am like, well, I can't move to that place in town because I don't want my son to go to that school. Whereas I went to those kind of schools and it was fine because it was me. But then I later found out my siblings got bullied. And so it's really hard to, especially when your kid is really young, to know what's the best course for them. So that's my new gay frontier that I'm working on. I'm sure I'll do great things and I'll mess things up too, but you know, it's kind of a new thing.
Okay. And to bring it back to Oglethorpe a little bit, how was your experience being a part of the community at Oglethorpe, since you were all graduated at different times? So you all had different experiences. And obviously I'm a queer person at Oglethorpe now, so I'm also getting a completely different experience. So how is it like for each of you?
Since I'm the oldest, I guess I can start. Listen, I showed up and I was just me, and I don't think all the professors understood what that meant. There were definitely very old-fashioned people and conservative people who taught there. I had applied to a lot of very, very, very liberal schools, and I thought I was very, very, very liberal. And I'm really happy I didn't go to them in a way, because I don't think I would have been I don't think I would have navigated it as well. That said, I got to be kind of the liberal at Oglethorpe because there was so many kind of old-fashioned and conservative people. And so I think in a way I probably educated a lot of people, including professors, but I wished that I knew that I could have demanded more things. And I definitely was in classes where I'm like, but why are all the books we read always about heterosexual relationships, especially in literature? And I was like, why don't we ever read any gay stories? Why don't we ever read even more stories about anybody who's not a white straight person? And I didn't know how to ask that or demand that at the time, because I was a first gen college student. And I was just so excited to be there, and I wanted to succeed, and I wanted to just absorb everything. And I was more of a sponge rather than being able to speak up and say, this isn't right, or I think there could be something different, just because also we didn't really have the internet in the same way. So I didn't even know what was available. I know it sounds like I'm really old, but like I was on campus when they were literally digging trenches and putting in the Ethernet cables, and we were very excited. This is way before Wi-Fi. So like, anyway, we didn't have cell phones or anything. So it was just a much more of a traditional thing. So I just wished I'd known how to queer it better or to demand that from the faculty. And I think it's come a long way from what I've learned and what I've heard. So that makes me happy.
Jerry, if you had queried it more, maybe I would have come out in college. Likewise, to me, Oglethorpe is all about the community, right? And Outlet was still a very active but a small organization on campus. And I know when I was there, they went through some leadership changes that I think a lot of student organizations are kind of want to do. And they were still a presence, but again, it was mostly an ally organization. I don't know, I think, again, my experience with Oglethorpe has mostly been, as an out alumni. And again, it's just trying to be a visible member of the community and happy to talk to students about how they're navigating everything. And I'm glad to be on this panel for that reason. But always interesting to see the campus change and hopefully grow and evolve, and some of those core textbooks hopefully changing and getting less white and less straight and less old. But that all takes a lot of time.
Can I answer the question? Nicole, is that question from you?
So yeah, I did need to get to that next. We did have a question that was submitted in the Q&A. It's from a staff member. As a career coach here at Oglethorpe, how do I best guide trans or queer students in their job searches? So feel free to answer.
And I actually have been thinking about this because of this, obviously. And one of the things I wanted to talk about was how to dress and present in interviews and in the workplace, because I think that's a really confusing thing for a lot of people. And I have had a very, I had a queer person of color who was very gender non-binary in the way he dressed, and I love it. But I think probably going to an interview wearing lipstick or fingernail polish in some job environments, if you are male identified, is going to make it more difficult. Or even he would wear very like flamboyant clothes. Once you had the job, I felt like people were confused, but also kind of like, oh, this is interesting. And also I supported him. So he had an ally. But I think when you're going into those situations, we often don't know how to dress, right? We don't know how to go to a job interview. And nowadays it's like, what are the rules? And some of I hired like a dozen people through Zoom, so I didn't even meet them in real life. So how do you present in a way that you want to feel like you're putting your best foot forward, but you're also not negating some way that you identify or that you present? And I don't have a simple answer, but I do. And as I told you, I do my preppy drag. So I think I probably go more moderate conservative when it comes to job interviews and going for a job. So I'd like to hear what other people feel about that, because I don't want to give it bad advice, but yeah, I think maybe not wearing eyeshadow as a male identified person at a job interview, because it might undercut people taking you seriously. But then Carly, I wonder what you think about that.
We had a really interesting HR policy because I interviewed when I was 6 months pregnant, and I scoured the internet on whether or not I should reveal this about myself. And eventually what the hiring manager told me was that they don't want anything about you, particularly like a protected medical status, to sway your opinion one way or another. So I don't know if that directly goes to the type of clothes you're wearing. What I would say is that as an HR professional, what you're looking for is professionalism. And so if you want to, so like the word you used, Jerry, was flamboyant. Whether you are male, female, cis, trans, non-binary, you should not be wearing anything to an interview unless you're in the fashion industry that's flamboyant. So y'all, we're all old on this panel. Y'all are so young. I went to some clothing shop in Atlanta the other day, and they said they had masculine and feminine clothes instead of men and women. I thought, aha, this is wonderful. So things that are well fitted. If you're a woman and you're wearing a blazer, men's blazers are not cut for women's bodies if you have curves. So just things that fit you well and things that are neutral would be what I would suggest. If you have any kind of disability, require any kind of accommodation, that is your business. Your employer by law is required to accommodate you. You are not required to disclose, and it is illegal for them to ask. It is illegal for them to ask about your spouse, your sexual orientation, your identity. So those are some good things to know. And I
And your
did want,
age.
go ahead.
And your age.
And your age. They cannot ask you any of those things except for things that are pertaining to your job. And I did actually have an answer to the what was your life like at Oglethorpe? So I graduated in 10, and I'm going to spill a little bit of tea here. So for me, Oglethorpe was like my liberal oasis, and I was like, at the time, Nashville was very small and conservative, and it was very difficult to be out in my high school. And I was like, oh my God, it's the gay promised land. And everybody treated me with respect. And then at the time, all of our graduating classes were only like 300 people. And so, of course, there were like 5 lesbians, and we all dated each other and dated each other's exes. My ex-girlfriend's new girlfriend was my RA, and I could see them outside on the parking lot all the time. And I was like, this is bullshit. This was supposed to be my gay oasis. And this is just incestuous instead. So that was my experience. But I think it kind of shaped how I expected to be treated. I expected people to accept me. If they didn't, I expected them to shut their mouths, and I didn't expect to be disrespected. But again, that was in 2010. So that was my experience.
I think to go back to how you help someone through the job search, right? Like, it's tough to tell someone if they dress flamboyantly, right? Like, don't be flamboyant, because it feels like you're being inauthentic to yourself. But to the point that we're all trying to make, I think it is, in a way, the job interview hiring process. You're trying to get to the skills and abilities that you're bringing to that job and take away any of the personal elements that could cause questions or distractions or discrimination. That's why the laws are there, right? And unless you really know what workplace you're going into, in some way it is kind of better to conform and give less reason for dissent, right? Obviously, as a candidate, you want to know that the environment will be welcoming and opening to you. And then, once you're hired, be your full self, absolutely. So I think that's important to kind of get that feel for the place throughout the interview process.
But I think maybe part of it is that you're worried that maybe some candidates would only go in certain fields or certain jobs because they also feel like those would be more accepting. Carly kind of talked about that with programming and how maybe it's been male dominated, and so then people will feel like it's not welcoming. And I always worry about that. Like, did I go into certain fields or certain places because I didn't feel like I could compete with the big boys or the big people at some places because I needed to go into alternative news weeklies and niche fringe publications because those would be more accepting. And Rolling Stone was the most mainstream place I ever worked in. And then I worked there for 6 years, and I kind of am done with corporate media now, and I won't want to do it anymore. Unless the New York Times suddenly calls me up and says, okay, we're ready. So, which is something, but anyway, that's the other side of this, right? Of like, do you're studying astrophysics, and does that mean that you would hinder your opportunities because you would feel like astrophysics is not a place where you would feel as welcome, which I hope is not the case. But that also takes a certain mental confidence and ability to trust yourself and to not let people reject you and tell you no, because you're going to get a lot of no's. That's the other thing people have to realize about job interviews is at first, like, at least here in New York, I remember when I first moved here in 2006 or 2005, I was just like, oh my gosh, I'm not getting anything. And they were like, well, if you apply to 100 jobs, and you may get one interview. And then, of course, from those one interviews, you're not going to get hired. So you have to apply to how many hundreds of jobs so that you can get 5 interviews. So maybe you'll get one job. Like it's a numbers game, which is really frustrating.
You can also, just from also an HR perspective, there are a lot of DEI organizations, so diversity, equity, inclusion. One of the good things about, so there's a lot of debate, right? So you can have companies that just slap a rainbow on everything and say that they're for, but the good thing is being queer inclusive is trendy. And that ultimately is good news because then corporations are forced to create DEI organizations. If you want to know if a company is open and inclusive, you can look to see what kind of ERGs they have, employee resource groups. All of those should be visible online. If it's a publicly traded company, you might be able to see where their donations go. So you're looking for at least the company saying that they are open and diverse and inclusive, and that should include any protected class.
And then also looking at the benefits that they offer to you as an employee, right? Are they inclusive of different sexual orientations? And, I looked at the adoption and parental leave policy when I took this job 5 years ago. I don't have a kid yet, but I love knowing that my employer offers that to same-sex partners, right? And I can take the same leave to welcome a new child into my family as a heterosexual couple. So I think that was great.
I know that HRC is going through some bad press times right now, but they maintain a list of employers that get scored. They have an equality index. And like I work for Assuring and we have 100% on that. And it is, they will do that legwork for you. They will take all of the policies and they will give you a score, that company a score based on that. So you can also start from the HRC list.
Okay, we probably have time for one or two more questions. So as a young person right now, I obviously have many fears and anxieties about going into the workforce, especially as Jerry mentioned, like going into STEM sort of adds a whole other layer to it. So what were some fears or concerns that you each had growing up before you went into the workforce, and how did those end up coming true or not coming true throughout your career to this point?
I wish I could assuage your fears, but it's going to be scary no matter what we say. Just because the day after you graduate is a whole different world and it's just different. But I will say that I took advantage of all of the things that Oglethorpe offered, and I, did resume training, and I took extra resume training, and I did internships, and I did more resume training, and it really helped. And to this day, sometimes when I'm looking at resumes that people are giving me, like I have a person who's been out of college for 2 years and they'll send me a 3-page resume, and I'm like, what in the world is this? I've been working for 20 years and I've only recently decided I could go to 2 pages, and until very recently I was still on 1 page. And I was like, did you nobody train you how to do this? And some people get real fancy, real flashy, and I don't think, unless it's a creative field and a creative, like you're going to be a designer, that it needs to have all of that stuff. But anyway, I guess I'm conservative that way. So I think that the university, even in the 90s, offered so much support and how to find a job, and it really, really, really helped me. That said, my first job out of college was working for the university, and I did get blowback from my peers because I was like top of my class, was given awards for being like Mr. Oglethorpe. And then they're like, oh, and then he goes working in admissions. And I was like, I need a job. I don't have a trust fund. And I was able to freelance and do other things and kind of find my footing for those 2 years until I got my kind of first real career oriented job. But I was also very anti-career. Like I just wanted to learn and have fun and be creative. And as long as I was doing those things, I was okay. Somehow I ended up with a career, but I never really, really, really wanted it. And I think, Carly, obviously you said you jumped around. So you were also looking in different ways and didn't have there's no one path. Also, is that people always think, oh, if I do these things and I do follow all the rules, then I will get this. And no, that's not going to happen. You're going to go zigzag and do lots of things, and it's going to be confusing and frustrating.
Part of being in your 20s is just feeling this perpetual sense of confusion and anxiety. I have a very vivid memory of my one of my best friends and I sitting at a table at Oglethorpe, and we were just like, what are we going to do? What are our lives going to be? I will tell you, pretty much everything I was afraid of would happen to me happened to me, and I'm still here. And that is really powerful. Like, you are going to have some really scary experiences and you're going to be just fine. So that was powerful, is that the more things I weathered, the more confident I became. And also, Atlanta is a wonderful city for internships, just in general. And I was given one of my breaks by an Oglethorpe alum who worked at Atlanta Magazine, Kevin Benefield. So worked at Alumni
Me
Network.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I interned with him as well.
He's wonderful. So you will all, like, we all remember what it's like to feel that way. And just know that you're going to be okay, and just really take advantage of those internships. That will get you in the door.
Yeah, I think, like Jerry, my first 2 jobs actually were also at Oglethorpe. And so it helped to be in that space that I knew was safe. But it's still a totally different world when you graduate and you're working, right? And so now you might call it imposter syndrome, right? And like, you feel like you don't belong. You don't know what you're doing. You don't know how to work an 8-hour day. And that's normal. And everyone goes through that, right? Even if you have an internship, like, you've got a taste, but it's different to be a real life grown up and to do this and work in the world. So, just know that it's okay not to know everything, and you're there to learn. You're there to figure out what your job is. Again, you might not know your career. There's definitely not a path. Very few jobs, have that ladder. And just enjoy every experience that you have and try to learn from it and grow yourself in that job, and grow yourself for your next job too.
I think it's important to note the imposter syndrome thing. I actually love talking about it because it doesn't go away. I mean, it flares up, and I feel like, do I actually know do I know anything? And that, I'm just telling you, like, there's also people who are really skilled at making you feel that, and you have to, like, battle them. And
Yourself.
yeah, that too. and then also, the other thing that I remember being really frustrated with the first couple years, maybe the first 5 years, was thinking, wait, I went to this really great school and worked really hard and know so much, and why am I getting the same jobs as these kids who went to nothing? And like, why didn't I just go to the easy school? And that stopped happening after a few years, and you started seeing things fall away, and you started seeing the critical thinking that you had being more important than maybe specific training that the other people might have had at the school that they went to. And that takes a while. And I will say that I think most people, that first and second year especially, they get a little angry and bitter, and they think, wait, I went to this really hard place and worked really hard. You're not entitled to anything, like, and people get a little bitter about that. And you have to fight that as well, I think, and remember, like, that you did learn things that will last you the rest of your life. And I'm in conversations now that I still am thinking about things that I learned in my freshman year of college, that I'm sure that people I work with don't even think about college anymore. And the fact that I was reading primary texts, and I tell them, like, oh, well, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, well, how do you know this stuff? I'm like, well, that's what we all did. Yeah.
Well, thank you all so much. I do want to quickly plug in all of the services that we offer in career development. I mean, Jerry touched on it, Mark touched on it, Carly touched on it. We oversee jobs and internship opportunities. So if you don't have your Handshake account activated, please do so. And we also do services like resume reviews. And we've got a really cool event next week where alums will be reviewing your resume in a 20-minute time span. So it's called Resume Blitz. So be sure to sign up. It's in the chat. And this recording will be made available on YouTube. So thank you to everybody.
If I could just briefly say one last thing.
Sure.
Don't be shy about reaching out to alumni. We all are open to it, especially if you don't ask us for a job. If you just want to have an informational interview, or say, hey, virtual now, I guess, but can I get a coffee with you? Or can I just ask you some questions? Like, I'm so generous and open to that. Just don't ask people for a job, because as soon as you do that, they shut down. But don't ever be shy about asking somebody for advice, or asking them for some sort of information, especially if you flatter them.
Yeah, and I'm an alum myself. So, I mean, we share the love, as alumni, and we actually rely heavily on alumni support in our department. So just come through our doors first, and we'll match you up. We've got an event called Career Connections too, where we match students up with professional alumni. Yeah, we've got about just like 4 minutes. If you have any words of wisdom, last minute, like words that you wanted to share with our students, we'd love to hear them.
Everything's going to be okay. You got this.
Love it.
That's fantastic. I was going to say the Oglethorpe name is small but mighty, right? And it's out there, and people who have hosted Oglethorpe interns before know what an Oglethorpe student is like, right? And so they know that you're capable of thinking through problems, unlike some other schools' graduates. And as Jerry said, the Oglethorpe alumni are here to, support you, help guide you if needed, and always happy to connect with a fellow Petrel.
Yeah, and I guess my thing I always like to say, and I kind of touched on it earlier, is I always believe as long as I'm learning, then I'm gonna be okay. As soon as I realize I'm in a job and I'm not learning or I'm not having fun or something, if it just becomes drudgery, you can easily just leave, and you shouldn't stay in any job where you're not feeling some sort of fulfillment. And there's plenty of other things you can do in your life. So don't ever feel like you're stuck. There's always other opportunities and other things to do.
All right, Jamie, do you have any last questions? Did they answer and cover everything?
Yeah, you all answered all of my questions. This is a fantastic panel. I'm so glad we got to do this.
Same.
Yeah, thank you. Really, I just
Thank
love the
you.
transparency and really practical advices that you were able to share with our students. So yeah, thank you again for joining us. And we'll see you next time.